Hi, Nick. Welcome to the podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me on. My name is Nick, and a little bit about me. I am a software engineer at a mid-sized tech company, and I have worked at a couple of companies and interned at a couple of companies. One of the more notable ones you might know of, Meta, Facebook.
Soft plug. Three,
Three,
two,
two,
one.
one.
Launch to success with Vera V.
V.
Thank you for coming on, first of all. The reason why I decided to bring Nick onto the podcast is, first of all, I think your success has been very inspiring work-wise, because I think you've accomplished a lot for your age, and I'm sure our listeners today can get some of that. But also, my younger sister, Taya, she's like around high school, college age, and it just got me thinking about all the things that you can do when you're young to set yourself up for success when you're older, which is, I know, a topic you're very comfortable talking about. So that's the main reason. Can you give us a little overview of your story thus far? Like of your overall work experience and what got you into software engineering?
Sure. So, what got me into software engineering? That's a great question that I think might be better suited if I kind of dive into how I majored in computer science in the first place when I first started at college. So when I was in high school, I was extremely addicted to video games. It was not the best decisions, but I think if I hadn't done that, I would have never majored in computer science. So I definitely don't regret it, so to speak. And I only majored in computer science because of that experience. And as a result, I ended up, following the software engineer career path. If I walk you through my college journey, when I was a sophomore and I had no experience, I had no work experience, except I would tutor. I would tutor kids in math and computer science and maybe a little bit of physics here and there. But other than that, there was no real work experience. My junior year, I interned at a company that makes 3D printers in Boston. And then my senior year, I interned at Facebook. Now, typically seniors don't really get the opportunity to intern because you're technically graduating and you're supposed to join the workforce. But I told them I was doing a master's. So I didn't end up doing a master's, but I still got to do the internship and I still got, a full-time job right after that.
And with the video games portion of it, because I think that's something that's very relatable to a lot of people, especially nowadays. With video games, I'm sure it's still a big part of life, but also social media as well, because everyone's like on it all the time. So how do you feel like you got into that toxic social media video games route? And then how do you escape from that? What do you feel like was like the instigator?
I think a part of it is just growing up. When I, was 18, 19, I was still playing a lot of video games, but a part of me was just really growing up. Video games just weren't like being as fun anymore. It just wasn't the same. And I started meeting really inspirational people that were extremely successful, that were just my age. And I thought, if they're doing all of this, they're extremely successful. Why can't I be? Why shouldn't I be? And the amount of hours I put into video games, for reference, if I had put all those hours into video games, I would be way more successful than I am now. And it takes just that little bit of like self-realization that you can achieve a lot with the time you're wasting.
Mm-hmm. That's super wise. That's like a TED Talk podcast material. But with inspirational people, where do you feel like you started coming across them? Was it just in your everyday life? Was it like online? You started seeing, I don't know, gurus and people who are successful.
I believe everyone in their life has someone that is extremely successful that they look up to. Whether you meet them at school, maybe in a club or some activity, it doesn't really matter. Everyone has that one person in their life that's very successful for their age or their, where they are in life. Me personally, I met them essentially through college and they were very, very successful and I looked up to them and, it got me thinking I should really, really see if I can be this successful too, because, I was inspired and I just had no other choice at that point. I had to do it.
Mm-hmm. That's really cool. And I feel like that's very wise. And especially with social media now, I feel like there are obviously a lot of downsides to it, but there are also as many, if not more, upsides if you look at it from an inspirational sense. Because I feel like if you live your life a certain way and say there's nobody in your circle or your community who has the life that you want to be living, you can always look outside of that into the social media space and just see how people are living and get inspired by that. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's tons of creators, there's tons of people on social media that are, you could almost find anyone that you want to be doing, whatever you want to be doing in the world, you could almost find that exact same thing. Someone is making content for it on social media.
Yeah, and that's super helpful. I feel like, especially when choosing a career path. Okay, so obviously you started with video games and then transitioned into computer science just as a pathway. That was the most logical. And then with computer science, do you was it just because, like I said, it was kind of like logical and you're already into it? Was there like a spark of passion or an incident where you're like, oh, this is actually really, really cool and that's what I want to do?
Definitely no spark of passion. Like I said, I played a lot of video games, and I figured, well, computer science just the makes sense. It's the next logical choice. I'm majoring in computer science, and I didn't really realize how, lucrative of a career path it was until I was about 19, 20 years old, and I realized, wow, there's a lot of people making a lot of money and doing a lot of crazy things, and that's when I really, really got on the grind.
Hmm. And with people now, with young people, like, I mean, I guess everyone young, including us, but with young people who also want to have a lucrative career that makes them a lot of money to really make sure that they're living like a successful life, what would you recommend, like, in finding a career path that best suits them?
Well, a career path that best suits you, something that you enjoy doing, isn't necessarily something that's going to make a lot of money, right? So it really depends what your goals are, what you want to achieve. If your goal is to help people, you can do that, but I'm not necessarily sure that it'll make you a ton of money or maybe necessarily as much money as another career path. That being said, I want to put a disclaimer. There's, a million and one different career paths, right? You can become a doctor or a lawyer, whatever it may be, and you can also help people. You can do so many different things. But if your goal, let's say, is to make money, you need to look up. The first thing you do is you just Google top 10 careers that make a lot of money. It's, when I say it, it sounds very simple, but that's truthfully how easy it is and how
Hmm.
simple it is. It's just a matter of finding the careers that sound simple, and then you can narrow it down from there, see which ones you're interested in, then see what steps you need to take to actually get into that career path, see how you can best optimize to become the most successful in that career path. And pretty soon, you're going to be snowballing into a state where you're very successful and you don't even know how you got there, but it all started from this very simple idea of just looking up and deciding what you want to do.
Hmm. Like the research portion of it. And when would you recommend a person starts doing that?
Yesterday, well, as soon as possible. Well, I mean, what's stopping you from starting right now? Start
Hmm.
as soon as possible. If for someone that wants to be, a software engineer and make a lot of money going that route, the best you can make is quite a bit of money, right? And you can do quite a lot of cool, crazy things with a lot of different, interesting, extremely exciting technologies. But if you want to be really competitive, you should start as young as possible, and that could be, when you're 14 in middle school or 13 even, it could
Hmm.
also be, like me, I really only started when I was 19, 20. But the point is, you got to get started, and you got to get it started as soon as you can.
Do you feel like, speaking of that, with starting yesterday, I like that. But do you feel like there's any point in time when it's too late to start? Because I think especially when switching careers, there seems to be a lot of stigma that kind of once you're 18 and you start going to college, that's like your chosen path that you stay on for the rest of your life. So do you feel like it's too late to start at any point?
It really depends on the career path you're talking about, but I can give you a point of reference for my career path. In terms of software engineering, I would say it becomes too late when you're like maybe in your 50s or 60s.
Hmm.
So until then, before then, you still have a great, great opportunity to go to school, get a computer science degree, or even skip that, just go to a computer science boot camp for 6 to 8 weeks
Yeah.
and just start applying to jobs, applying to internships. I'm not saying your first job you'll make a lot of money or you'll be super successful, but you need that experience when you're switching and when you're starting out. It doesn't really matter what age you are. You could be a graduate from college, but you still need experience, right? Whether you're 40 with tons of experience in another field or you're 22 and you just graduated college, you still need the experience to get started in the career.
Hmm. For sure. And I also like what you mentioned about the computer science bootcamp, because obviously computer science is not my field. I'm a slightly different one. But my older sister, I think she babysat for this one family, and they just moved from Russia maybe, I don't know, like 6 months back. But then the guy, the dad, he was working like a very different job, but then he got, I think, certified, or maybe he went to like a computer science boot camp, and then he started making six figures as soon as he landed his first job. And that was kind of like out of the college, out of the norm. So do you feel like with having that sort of career path, if you do not go the traditional, like you get a computer science degree, you do internships, then you get a job route. Do you feel like it's still feasible and still plausible to secure a lucrative job?
Definitely. It's absolutely still feasible and still plausible. It's really going to come down to your work ethic and how motivated you are to get the job. Now,
Mhm.
the job market landscape is always changing, right? Right now, it might seem super competitive. You might see a lot of people struggling to get jobs, but the true is always going to, or the, excuse me, the same is always going to be true, whether you look back 20 years ago or 20 years from now. It's always going to be competitive. So really, truth is if you want to do this, if this is what you want to do, just get started. And if you keep at it long enough, you will be successful. In fact, you almost have no other choice but to be successful.
Yeah, I really like that actually because I feel like a lot of podcasts I listen to, especially when it comes to like business, they always have this like idea of instead of looking for short term quick successes, of having the mindset of like I'm gonna outlive any competitor in the business, like I'll be there longer. And same for social media because I think especially with content creation and like influencing, a lot of people want to get into it and start documenting their life, but the argument year after year, ever since the time social media started, it's like, oh, but there's so many creators there. Oh, but there's no space for me. But there's always been a lot of creators, no matter what platform it is. Now it's TikTok and Instagram. Before it was YouTube, like in 2016. But it's always been, I feel like, as quote unquote hard to make it. But that's in any field. Like even with drop shipping, you see those courses like get drop shipping millions fast, whatever. But
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you really boil down what we're talking about here, it applies to every single career in the world, right? There's always going to be more opportunities, right? Any sort of business you start, you may want to start, for example, an energy drink company and think, well, there's already a million different competitors out there. I'm just going to get crushed. But that's just simply not true because then there would be no new competitors ever. But that obviously we know that's not true because we see new competitors come out all the time and be very successful. So it really
yeah,
applies to every single career path. Just there's always going to be more opportunities. You just have to be willing to take them.
yeah, I think it's definitely very mindset focused. Because once I was at a meta event from a different side of things, but it was
Hmm.
with Aloe Yoga, and Aloe Yoga is a very prominent wellness brand. They have like supplements, skincare, they have everything now. But it started with just clothes for yoga, and you would think when they entered into the market, there were a hundred, if not thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of brands just like them. But what set them apart? Because now they're kind of like the it brand. And then I
Yeah,
think we spoke to the not the founder, but the marketing like director who's been there for a
yeah,
while. I think her name is Bridget or so, and she was just like, well, that's the mindset we had. Like we knew that it was going to be the it wellness company. It was just a matter of time of making that come to fruition.
absolutely. Yeah, and what you said earlier about outlasting every other competitor, being the one in the market the longest, that is the greatest mindset to have when you're thinking about being successful, right? You're not thinking about what am I gonna achieve next week. You're thinking about what am I gonna achieve long term, and what am I gonna do today that's gonna help that goal long term.
Yeah, and speaking of this is slightly a broader topic, but of success, I'm reading Dopamine Nation right now. It's a shortened version. Actually, no, not dopamine. Dopamine Detox. It's just a book about dopamine. I like it. But there's this one quote by the author who says that the key that's most crucial to success is being able to think long term. And obviously nowadays with video games for you, social media for like everybody, short attention spans are truly like the primary thing that anyone has right now, which really sucks because then people aren't able to think as long term versus like you said of thinking of that long-term success of wanting to achieve things in years versus just in minutes or hours.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. You know, social media, video games, anything that really relies on short attention span is really really hard to deal with when you're trying to have like a long-term goal, right? You know, you can say like for example, when you're studying for a test, maybe the test isn't for 2 weeks, right? It's studies have proven to show that if you study like throughout the 2 weeks, you know, maybe a little bit every single day, you're going to be more successful than if you cram it in all in one night. So it's more so thinking about that long term goal and not getting distracted by other things, you know, having the attention span, staying focused on what your goal is. You know, you don't want to constantly be switching between a million different things if you really want to be successful in this one area.
Hmm. And do you feel like for you, because you said that changing point for you was at like 1920, around that time, do you feel like that's when you set yourself a long-term goal or did it just kind of fall into place?
Yeah, I definitely set myself a long-term goal. I had high ambitions and high hopes. I was trying to go to at least an Ivy League undergrad from a community college. I was trying to transfer. So that was really my goal. And that was a very, very high goal, right? Very hard fruit to pick from a community college. However, as a result, I ended up achieving a lot more than that because I got really good in my classes. I started getting really good grades. I started working on really cool projects. I started meeting really, really interesting people that were really successful. And as a result, I ended up getting my first internship as a byproduct. I wasn't even really trying to at the time, but as a just, you know, mindset of, okay, in order to get this harder goal, I need to do this smaller, easier thing. So getting an internship seemed pretty easy compared to getting into an Ivy League at the time.
Mm-hmm. That goes with the quote. It's a little cheesy, but shoot for the moon, you'll land on the stars.
Exactly. If you make your sights so high, you're going to achieve something. Now, what it is, I don't know, but you'll achieve something that you didn't think you would previously.
Mm-hmm. And then with your internship, the first one was, could you remind me again what it was? And then what was the process of also like getting it and achieving that?
Like I said, I really wanted to go to a great school for my undergrad, and if not, at least for my master's. And I knew I needed work experience for that. So I looked up, like I said, we go back to this basic, very research focused approach of I looked up how do I get into this school? And it said I need X and Y and Z, one of which being work experience can really help because it'll, show that you really, really are successful and ambitious and motivated. And so I then narrowed down the research. How do I get an internship? How do I really become successful in my career path right now? And it's really just this, very simple minded research approach and then just doing what it says to do. Anyone could do it, really. So that's what I did. I found online, to get an internship, you have to treat it like a numbers game. And I did. And I applied to a lot of different internships. And then I ended up receiving a couple of different offers. But the one I went with was a 3D printing company, and it was a really cool internship. And I took that one over the other ones because it was working closer on the kind of technologies that I liked. And also, I thought long term, like, will this look better on my resume than the other experiences? And I thought it would.
Mm-hmm. For sure. That's very interesting. And then with internships, with the numbers game, you mentioned that. But what would you say is like a good, healthy expectation for people to have? Obviously, it's a little bit of a tougher question because I feel like that fluctuates over time. But for like to make it simple, how many internships should a person apply to expect to get to hear back from like an X number of them?
Truthfully, like, the answer is going to vary for every single person, right? If you are someone that's going to, I don't know, a really, really good school like Stanford or UCLA or UC Berkeley, you might only apply to like 50 or 60 and hear back from a couple of them and get a couple of job offers. But if you're like me and you went to community college, you might have to apply to several hundred, if not over 1,000. Now, that being said, if you're getting into the 1,000 range, if you're even approaching that number, you probably have to really evaluate what's on your resume. You really have to evaluate, am I giving the employer what they want? Because if I had to be honest, you're probably not if you're even getting close to applying to 1,000 jobs and not having interviews, and interviews is another thing. Like, if you're interviewing and you're failing the interviews, right, that's another thing to work on. You need to be passing those interviews. That's just plain and simple. But just for getting the phone call, getting to the interview stage, I wouldn't say more than a couple hundred, maybe like 200, 300. That's about what I applied to, and I heard back from about 15. So, out of those, I was able to interview a couple of times successfully and get some job offers.
And how far in advance should you apply for an internship? Because I hear, like, obviously I'm not part of like the college life, so it's a little hard. But from what I've heard, you have to do like some people do it a year in advance or somewhere around that. Because then by the time that actually like, the applying part comes about, everything's booked. Would you say that's true?
The truth is, just apply today. Like, apply yesterday. Apply when your resume is ready, and like, there's no too early to start applying. You
Mhm.
can continuously apply until you get something. Now, if you're really trying to go for like a summer internship, which is very typical, you want to apply at least, like, start applying by August, the year before. So
Yeah.
maybe you should have finished up most of your applications mid-September, and then you might see a few more applications. You might put in a few more over the next few months, but the bulk of your applications will be from like August to October, I would say. But that being said, you can still be applying in June, July, May, April, every other month of the year, because there's always going to be opportunities. And if there are less people applying during those times, that just makes you all the more competitive.
Yeah, for sure. And then with your Boston internship, how was that? Because I mean, you moved like across the coast for that work experience.
Yeah, it was good. It was interesting because I had never really been to the East Coast before, but it was great because I was able to get a little tiny apartment, a little studio, and I was able to work in the office a couple days of the week. This was during COVID, so they still had in person, but um, I'm glad they did because I had much better work experience as a result. So my internship was originally just supposed to be from January to April, so about 3.5 4 months, but they actually extended me to the end of August or the start of September, and they never would have extended me had I not asked, right? So I actually just asked my manager. I was like, "Can you guys give me an extension? I'd love to stay here and keep working on the product." And if I hadn't asked, I never would have gotten it. So you really have to be the one, making the first move. You have to be the one approaching. Otherwise, like you think someone's just going to hand you something for free. That's not really how it works. So
Uh-huh. That's really cool. And you're able to do that because, like you said, it was during COVID, so your classes were online. But then what about when it went back to in person?
yeah. So like I said, I started in January. I was still taking classes, 5 classes at the time. Um, Luckily, I didn't take any summer classes, or I might have taken one or two. I don't really remember, but they were also online. All my classes were online. And when school went back in person, I actually did try to ask for another extension over the fall from September to December, but they said, no, you got to be in person. So unfortunately, I didn't get to come back for round 3 of the internship, and I just moved to school and I, started taking classes in person. And at this point, I was already in my senior year of college, so I only had 1 year left before I would go on to do other opportunities.
And then with your next internship, what was the process behind that?
It was a lot more fun because I think this was a pretty crazy hiring market at the time. The first internship was a little bit rough, but the second one was a pretty crazy hiring market. So I got tons of offers. I got offers from Amazon, J.P. Morgan Chase, Facebook, a couple others I can't even remember. But I I applied to maybe 100 at that point, and really, why I was able to get so many offers is because I had already had an internship experience. Granted, the first internship wasn't like a great internship. It wasn't like the best internship. It wasn't the best paying, but it was experience. Like I said, bring it back to what I researched. I needed experience, and then I got that experience, and it only made it easier to get the next one, and it just will snowball like that. And pretty soon, like I said, you're going to be very successful, and it all starts from this one very simple principle of deciding what you want to do, how you can do it, right? So yeah, the process was a lot easier. I applied, and I had just brushed up on my interview skills a little bit, and I aced most of my interviews. A couple of them I failed miserably, and that's just how it goes.
What was your worst interview story?
I was interviewing for, I think, a top tier startup in New York, and they actually flew me out to New York to interview. And I was in person, I was in the office, and it was an all day interview. This is like the fourth round of interviews, and it was, like I said, all day in person. And so the first 2 interviews in the office were technical interviews, and they went by pretty easily. I thought they were okay. And then we had lunch. That was kind of like another interview. And then the third interview was more of like a behavioral technical interview combined. And I was answering all his questions, and then at the end he asked if I had any questions for him, and I wasn't really sure who this person was, so I asked him, "Oh, I'm just curious, what do you do here?" Little did I know, he was a CEO. So he told me right away, "Well, I'm actually the CEO." And I was like, "Oh, I didn't know." And I checked later, and it turns out that the um, the email I got going over the day of interviews, they had the names listed for each interview, and the third name was actually incorrect. So it wasn't the person that I thought it was going to be, because I couldn't find the third person on LinkedIn or any sort of website because it just didn't exist because the name was
Mhm.
wrong. So it was a little bit embarrassing, and then it was pretty embarrassing. Yeah, I'd say that was definitely the worst because I think maybe if that didn't happen, maybe I would have gotten an offer, but they rejected me. So
Do you feel like there's any way to recover from that?
you do the best you can. There's truthfully like not much you can do. I don't think it's that big of a deal, but also it just seems a little bit like unprofessional. Like you're not really interested in the company. Like if you don't even know
Mm,
who the CEO is, you know. So
yeah.
yeah.
So I guess the takeaways for interviews just to do your research very
Do your
thoroughly.
Make sure you know who you're talking to. Big tip. For some interviews you might not even have to know anything about the job as long as you can talk to the interviewer well.
Really? Because I've heard about that, but can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. Um, some Sometimes you'll get into an interview and you guys will spark on some maybe common shared interest that you guys have, and you guys will be able to talk about it for the entire duration of the interview. And more often than not, I think they will give you a pass on that over someone who just, did the technical interview and maybe they did okay, maybe they didn't, maybe they did great, but they won't remember you as much as the person that they had a great conversation with.
Mm-hmm. So the person, what would you say is the ratio between like being a good expert and then having like a good, likable personality where you can connect to the interviewer and to everybody who works at the company?
It really depends on, again, the career you're choosing, but specific to software engineering, I think it really depends. But you got to be really likable. That's for sure. Because no one wants to work with someone that's a pain in the ass to work with, and that's true of any job, any career. You
Yeah.
don't want to work with someone who's going to be a pain in the ass to work with. You want to work with someone that's going to uplift you and bring you joy, and also know what they're talking about. So to a certain extent, I would say it's very important to know what you're talking about technically. But if you assume everyone in the room has the same exact skill set, technically speaking, they all can do the same stuff, you're going to want to work with the people that are more fun and more open to work with, right? You're not going to want to work with the people that are rude or unpleasant to work with.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then for the interview, what would you say are some interview tips to make sure that you interview well while still highlighting the best of your personality, but still like coming across as a good, solid professional?
Don't be afraid to ask questions. That's, I think, the biggest problem with a lot of interviews that I see. For context, I give interviews at my company sometimes, and a lot of people just fail to ask very, like, kind of common sense questions, just because I think maybe they're nervous or they don't realize that they can't ask those questions. Because when you don't ask questions, you might miss something that would have been solved with like the most simple question. So always never be afraid to ask questions. Just, if you're wondering anything, just ask question, and it can't possibly hurt you.
What kind of questions would you say is good to ask on an interview?
In technical questions, make sure you clarify anything that could be possibly like a mystery, like anything. Don't really assume anything, and if you are going to assume something, ask if it's okay to assume, right? So anything that seems unclear, just ask right away. For more behavioral interviews, try to ask not only just like what the person does or how the company culture is. Don't ask these like very basic questions, but try to be very specific as well. Try to ask like, um I don't know, ask them something fun, something that they'll remember, something that probably they haven't been asked before ever, because that will really make them remember you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if I had an interview and ask questions, I think maybe I would ask, let's see, um, I don't know, maybe I would ask like if you had to go back and reapply for this job, and let's say you got an offer, what would you think twice about before accepting the offer, knowing that you've worked at the company now? You know,
Wow. That's like very bullseye. I like that. What about personal questions? Like personal questions to the interviewer. Would you recommend that or just keeping it very much in along the lines of the company?
I think personal questions are great. You want to make sure that you're not being inappropriate, of course. But if you guys connect on something on a personal level, that's the best way to pass your interview. I've had experience with that. At one of the companies I interned at, I we connected on just doing long distance with people that we were dating. And I don't remember how we connected on that exactly. I think maybe I asked them like, oh, like where they're located, and they told me something like, oh, I'm actually located in California, but right now I'm in Boston. And I asked, oh, cool, what are you doing in Boston? And we just kind of went from there. It was very natural progression, nothing really forced or awkward, nothing inappropriate either. And we were able to connect on, something very personal. And I think the interviewer probably liked me a lot more because of that.
Just keeping it very like human, I think, is a good way. Because I think it's very easy to get super technical and like want to give off a certain impression of yourself. But if you come back to the roots of just connecting with people as people, then that seems to be a lot more beneficial.
Absolutely.
Hmm. Okay. So the interview I feel like we covered. Now with your second internship, that was with Meta, right?
Yeah.
How was the experience working there? Because I think that's a dream company for a lot of people. It's kind of like Google, like, oh, work at Google, work at Meta.
Yeah, I always, whenever people ask, I always like to say it's like working at a theme park for adults.
Mm.
It's great. I can't deny it. Like, I worked in the California Menlo Park offices in the Bay, and they have all of the amenities that you could ever possibly want. And the work culture isn't terrible for an intern because at the end of the day, you're an intern, right? Like, it doesn't really matter if you're successful or not. And that being said, you should still work hard and you should still try your best, but you can also just not if you don't want to. So, it's a great experience. It was a great experience for me. Some of the kind of like amenities they have like 20 different restaurants of all types of different kinds of food, cafes, dessert shops. They have different classes that are like fitness classes. They have a very nice gym. They have in the middle of the internship for my internship, they threw the interns a huge intern party, and that was pretty cool. So yeah, it was a great experience, and I think if your goal is to work at one of these bigger tech companies and intern there, like Facebook, Google, try to have prior work experience if you can, and then if not, maybe just go out, reach to recruiters directly on LinkedIn.
Mm.
But I'll say it's a good choice to intern at because it's a great experience and they're great companies to intern at.
What did your average day look like? Like an average day in your life as an intern in Meta?
So they paid for our housing in the Bay. So first off, I was staying in a studio apartment that they were paying for. And in the morning, they would pick us up in shuttles that had Wi-Fi and were pretty comfortable. And they would shuttle us to the office. And then I would grab breakfast from one of the cafeterias. And it was really, really good breakfast, really good food. They have so many different options. They have like five other breakfast restaurants open, and then
Mm.
I'd grab a coffee, and then I'd probably work from I want to say 8:30 to 11:30, and then our team would grab lunch together. We'd choose one of the restaurants and grab lunch together, and then we would go back, and then I would work probably until either 4:30 or 7. 4:30 because if I didn't want to stay for dinner, that was the best time to leave for the shuttles. They would shuttle us back. 7 if I wanted to stay for dinner because they would also, have free dinner. And like I said, everything's free. All the meals is free. So,
And what about your classes? Because I mean, you were still taking classes at that time. Because senior year?
oh well, for my second internship at Facebook, I wasn't taking any classes. I had already graduated at this point. This was in
Oh,
between my graduation and the supposed start of my master's degree.
uh huh. Okay. And how long was that time period? 3 months? Four?
Yep, 3 months.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And with that kind of environment, because I mean, I think everyone's heard of like the Google offices, which seems similar to the Meta ones, where everything's like provided. You have all the fitness classes, you have like meditation rooms, sound baths, whatever. Do you feel like overall that increased your productivity in the workplace, or did it serve kind of as a distraction in some ways?
Absolutely increased for me personally because well if I'm working at home, I'll be motivated, but I won't be like in the office environment where there's, teammates to talk to, and if I have a question, I can just ask them really easily. Whereas when I'm at home, I can't do that. So when I'm in the office, I'm motivated to be there because there's free food and the food is actually delicious. And then there's friends there that I've made, and then there's teammates that I can just lean on for help at any time that I need. So if
Mhm.
anything, it boosted my productivity, and they got a lot more man hours out of me than they would have otherwise.
Yeah, for sure. Do you feel like with companies, as far as you know, for tech companies, that's a good, obviously if they have like the funding for it and if that's their setup, but that's a good route to go to kind of like create a, would you say, a theme park for adults?
Um, yeah, it really depends on the scale of the company, but I think all companies should adopt this policy of like feeding your employees at least for lunch, because you're just almost undoubtedly going to get higher productivity out of your employees. I think it's a great idea. No one
Mhm.
wants to go to work and be hungry all day, and no one really likes to bring lunches to work. Some people do, and that's fine if that's your thing. But if you had the option of delicious free food at work, I'm sure you'd take that. And if anything, that would motivate you to want to work even harder because the company is doing something nice for you every single day, without question.
Yeah, I think it's just about finding like a good workplace balance. And it seems like at Meta, the work culture was very healthy in that regard
For interns,
for
yeah,
interns. Do you feel like it was different? I don't know if you can talk about this, but it was different for the full-time employees?
I wouldn't know. I'm sure it really depends on the team that you're on, but it was good for interns.
Okay, as long as it was good for interns.
Exactly.
Okay, and then after that experience, your second internship, because obviously you've graduated, you're not actually like pursuing a master's. Where did it take you from there?
So I had a couple of like job offers, but I had actually already declined them all. I had a full time job offer for Amazon and a couple of other ones, but I declined them because I thought I was gonna do a master's. So at this point, I started applying to a lot of different companies, and in terms of the competition for getting a job right out of college, I know right now it's extremely hard for computer science students. And even back then, it was not that easy because this was right around when a lot of layoffs were going on in the tech world. So, what set me apart from every other college grad was that I had not just one junior summer internship, but I had two. I had two internships. And really, I kind of had three because my first one was extended into two, right? It was 8 months or 9 months instead of just the typical 3 or 4.
And then for applying for jobs, because you mentioned you declined some offers, what was really like a key factor that you were looking at in a full time offer? Or like actually,
Um,
with actually start with the masters, because you said you were going to do a masters. Then what changed your mind, and then you just went into full
I
time
didn't
work?
get into the schools I wanted to. So
Oh.
I wanted to get into, like I said, really high tier schools, Ivy Leagues. I didn't get
Mhm.
into any of the ones I really wanted to go into. So I decided, well, if I'm not going to go to one of these schools, I'm definitely not going to go to a master's and spend a lot of money on a place that I don't really want to be at. So I decided I'll just go straight into the workforce and start making money right away.
And how's the applying process for that? Obviously, like you said, it set you apart, but overall.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was the same concept of, it's a numbers game. I applied to several hundred. I had to really brush up on my interview skills, make sure they were really, really sharp because I think a lot of companies were only accepting perfect interviews. Otherwise, you get rejected. And I was very competitive because I had multiple internships from my undergrad. So, really, I didn't have to really struggle that much in getting a job. I think from the time I started applying to actually receiving an offer, it was only about 6 weeks. I started right after my internship with Facebook ended, right around September, and then I got a job offer right around mid October. So about 6 weeks. And then I started working the very month after.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Is it, do you feel like in part because you treated the application process like a full time job? Because I hear people talk about that, and I think it's such a like a cool concept.
It's not only a full-time job, it's your entire life, right? You know, you're not, If you're not going to be working and making money, there should be no other priority on your mind other than getting a job, right? So I was spending, all day working on applying and brushing up on interview skills and
Mhm.
practicing interview questions. I would spend all day, sometimes 12, 14-hour days. And that may seem like a lot, but I was very, very motivated to not be homeless.
Good motivation to have. And what
Yeah.
do you think about this mindset? Because there's this one creator I follow. She was the marketing director for True, which is like the previous podcast. Well, one of the previous ones I did with Cushy. She's like the partnerships. But anyway, same company. But she stopped working there, and now she's in the job shopping process. Like instead of job hunting, she reformatted it to be like job shopping. And I think it's an interesting mindset to have. What do you think about it? Do you feel like when getting a job, mindset plays a crucial role in securing the kind of position you want?
I would say mindset plays a role as far as realizing that there's always going to be more opportunities. So if you get
Mm.
rejected from your dream job, there'll be another one you can apply to. There's always going to be more jobs you can apply to. Just realizing that you don't have to limit yourself to this certain set of jobs that you're looking at is all that matters. Your mindset plays a very crucial role in just not giving up.
Uh huh. Okay. That's very interesting. Because I think definitely it's a big loss of morale for a lot of people. Because I have some friends who are kind of finishing up college and like just looking at the job market alone. Everyone's a little bit scared at that point.
Yeah, I mean, don't take it personally if you get rejected. Think of it as a numbers game. Everything in life is really a numbers game if you really think about it. But
Mhm.
just keep going. Don't get discouraged. Maybe it'll take you a few months longer than you expected, but if you truly put in the work, you put in the effort that deep down in your heart is enough effort, then you'll be successful. And if you're struggling, reach out to people for help that might be able to critique your resume or give you tips on interviews. You can always practice with your friends, your family. Never limit yourself in any opportunity that presents itself. You might even meet connections just from going to a party and meeting someone that's starting a startup and they need a engineer, and then they'll
Mhm.
hire you as an engineer because you're really motivated and ambitious and you want to work for them.
Yeah. That's very cool. Just really putting yourself out there.
Absolutely.
Okay. Wow. And then for your full time work, because there's a lot of discourse, especially right now. I feel like post like COVID times, post quarantine times, there's a lot of remote work for young people. I hear different sides of it. Like remote work is great on one sense because you can kind of have your own schedule in a way. Obviously, there are a lot of meetings they have to keep in mind, but technically, it's a lot more flexible versus going to the office. But what do you think about that and that kind of balance?
Well, if your goal is to, maybe work a remote job because you need to spend a lot of time with family, there's nothing wrong with that. And remote work can be great. You can have potentially a really great work-life balance, But I'll say if you really want to be not necessarily just successful, but if you want to learn the most and you want to grow the most as a early career kind of individual, then you need to probably be in office. You need to be grinding it out, like you can't just be, sitting at home because you're not going to learn as much as you would otherwise in the office. And that may seem hard to believe, but it's true because there are just more opportunities that will present itself in the office than will at home. Now, that being said, working from home, working remote, has a completely, entirely different set of opportunities that you are available to that you would never have working in the office. And they both have pros and cons, and you should really figure out which you want to go for and which is best for you.
That's a really good answer. I think very helpful for sure. Okay, and this is kind of a side point, but I've been wondering, back to the application process to kind of anything, whether that be internships or jobs. I think also a big thing that a lot of people struggle with is imposter syndrome, like feeling like they're good enough. Do you feel like that's a challenge that you've ever faced, and if so, how'd you overcome it?
Absolutely. Especially when you're starting out somewhere new, you're going to face probably some decent amount of imposter syndrome. But you know, it's it's hard to adjust to, but you just take it one step at a time, right? Don't think like I need to be this brilliant engineer or this brilliant successful marketer or whatever it may be. Think, what do I need to do right now to fix the problem I'm working on right now, right?
Mhm.
And if you just take it one step at a time, it's not that big of a deal, right? It's like running a marathon. If you
Mm.
have to think, I have to run 26 miles, I still have to run for 4 more hours, there's no way. It's going to be a lot more mentally taxing than if you think, I just need to take one more step. So just take one more step. Not that big of a deal.
And I think also with applying, I think I heard this in a podcast, but there's a study done where a job description was presented to men and women, and for men, if they thought that they could do some of the things on it, they just applied, like they just went for it. Versus women, they like didn't, because unless everything just matched perfectly. And I feel like this goes with the idea, like not to make it gendered, but just overall, if you even think that like this is something that you'd want to do potentially, and you think that you can, or at least you can learn on the job, then what's the harm in applying and just putting yourself out there?
Absolutely. Always apply. But I'll give you a little caveat that maybe I've seen this, this take before
Mhm.
of, always apply because why not just take the opportunities that are out there? But there is a caveat that I think a lot of people aren't considering. Some jobs, and it's very, very specific, and I don't want you to get tripped up over it or really worry about it, but very specific jobs, once you go down the rabbit hole, specific companies, if you apply there and they reject you, they will permanently reject you and you will never be able to apply to that company again. So
Really?
for
How do
certain
you find
companies,
that out?
most companies are not like this, trust me. But some companies, if you get rejected, you're out for good, you're out for life. So you need to be very certain that this isn't one of those companies. If
How
that
do
is
you
a
find
company,
that out?
well, like I said, I've gone down the rabbit hole. I've done the research. It's the very basic principle of just doing the basic research. And that's what I've done.
That's crazy. I didn't know that. Okay, so what do you think should be the balance? Obviously, it depends, like field to field, job to job, but just very general, or you can speak on your field, whatever you feel most comfortable with. But what do you think should be the balance of just like going for it and knowing you can do most of it versus actually being like a qualified professional?
Um, just go for it. Don't even think twice about it. You know, just go for it. Like if you 99% of companies, if you get rejected today, you'll be able to apply again in 6 months. So
Mm-hmm.
just go for it. Like nothing's stopping you. If you think you're not qualified enough, maybe just ask someone who is in the field that's doing what you want to do and ask them
Yeah.
how you can kind of get to their level. It's
Mm-hmm.
always good to ask for advice from others.
Yeah, I actually have a friend. She did an internship with Nike in like Amsterdam in Europe, and she goes to UC Davis. I think she's graduating soon. But with her, I was asking her about how she did that, and she was just like, "Well, I set up a bunch of like LinkedIn interviews with people
Absolutely.
who already work there, and she just found it out."
Yeah, absolutely. I've done not LinkedIn interviews, but I've cold DM'd people on LinkedIn and added
Hmm.
people. And I've asked them how they got to where they are and how they did the programs that they did. And a lot of people are friendlier than you might expect. You know, th- but that being said, like just go for it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And also, one thing you mentioned, and I kind of want to expand on that a little bit because I think it's super helpful with following up with recruiters or like emailing them or reaching out directly. What would you say about that?
Yeah, so you can follow up, email, DM recruiters on LinkedIn or their email. Even better if you can find maybe a manager for the team that you want to work on or an engineer, but ideally a manager or a recruiter.
Hmm.
And there's nothing wrong with it. I don't think it can possibly hurt you. So if it can't possibly hurt you, then it could only help you, right? So may as well just try it out, do it, you know. But also I would say try to craft your message to be a little bit tailored to the person. Don't just send, something that looks copy and pasted. Because if you do that, the recruiter or whoever is going to take one look at it and close your message forever and never think about you again.
Hmm. For sure. And what would you say is like a good thing to include in that message, just as a very general guideline?
It really depends, but I guess as a very general guideline, introduce yourself and ask them if you can have a couple of minutes of their time. If your goal is to like get a job from their
Hmm.
company, then you might have to state like I'm very ambitious and I really want to see what I can do to get a job here. If your goal is just to have a conversation with them and not necessarily work for their company, you could try to be very direct. And this is something that maybe a lot of people don't do. Maybe it even seems weird to do, But you could even, if you just want to have a conversation with someone, think about their time, what value they're getting out of from talking with you. Some
Mhm.
people are just nice people and they'll enjoy talking to you, but a lot of people don't want to waste their time. So think about how you can, value their time. And what you can do if you really want to have a conversation with someone, you can just tell them flat out, like, I'll pay you if I can talk with you for 30 minutes, right? I'll pay you $50 or however much you think is appropriate. I'll pay you $50 if I can talk with you for 30 minutes. I'd love to ask you a couple of questions and see what I can learn from you. And I value your time. That's why I'm willing to pay you. Very simple. And I
Wow.
think a lot of people don't do that, but there's nothing wrong with it, in my opinion. You're giving value and you're getting a lot more value out of it.
Do you feel like it's rude in any way to kind of offer that up, I'll pay for your time?
No, no, absolutely. In fact, it's a sign of respect. It's
Mm.
a it's a sign that you really do understand that their time is valuable and you understand that they're coming on and answering your questions and having talking with you isn't something that is just an expectation, right? It's a sign of respect, if anything.
Wow, that's really cool. I've never heard of that before.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm willing to debate this till the end of the earth. I think it's an absolute sign of respect.
Yeah, no, for sure. Definitely like showcases how their time is valuable. Now moving into the last portion of this podcast episode. I just came up with it today. I called it the Successful Seven because it's an
Okay.
alliteration. So it's like a rapid fire fashion questions. Okay, so whatever comes, just go with it. Because I think it's like a very cool way to get to know you on a whole new level, but also obviously share your wisdom and any tips that you have. Okay, first question is, what would you say is the one thing that you look forward to every morning?
Coffee. Easy.
Nice.
Keep going.
How do you take it?
Espresso. Double shot or quad shot. Doesn't matter.
All right. Secondly, what's a quote or a piece of media that you've been thinking about lately?
Well, actually, just recently, I wrote on a little sticky note that I keep by my desk. It
Uh-huh.
goes something along the lines of 20 years from now, you'll be more disappointed by the things you didn't do than by the ones you did do. And I read that quote somewhere a long time ago. I think it's a very famous quote. Probably a lot of you listening have heard it. And it's very true, right? You're not going to be disappointed by things that you did do. I mean, unless you did something really weird, maybe, but you're only really going to be disappointed by the things you didn't do. So I love that quote. I keep it by me at all times.
That's so cool. Thank you for sharing. Very inspirational. Okay. And if you could interview one person, dead or alive, who would it be?
Probably it's this old magazine, very successful, famous magazine publisher. His name is Felix Dennis.
Mm-hmm.
He started multiple companies throughout his career, and he made the bulk of his money and success through selling one of his magazine companies for several hundred million or a couple $1 billion, but he got a several hundred million out of it. And I look up to him and I would want to have a conversation with him just to, it'd be fun. I think I'd learn a lot about his mindset, about
Mm-hmm.
his never giving up mindset. He started out with nothing, very poor, and he grew to be a very successful and wealthy, famous individual.
Yeah. And he's the Think and Grow Rich author, right?
No, no. He
Is that
That's a. I think that I don't. I think that's someone else. But he wrote. He did
him?
write a book. He did write how
Mm-hmm.
to I think it was How to Get Rich by Felix Dennis, but not Think and Grow Rich. I think that's a different book.
Yeah. Well, he's an author. That's what
He's
stuck
an
in my
author,
mind.
yeah. Absolutely.
It is How to Get Rich. Okay, I just double checked. Okay, perfect. Okay. What's one piece of advice that you'd give to your younger self?
Cherish your youth while you have it.
Sentimental.
Yeah.
And then what's one piece of advice that you'd give to your future self?
Spend as much time with loved ones as possible.
Uh-huh. And one thing that you're grateful for today?
My friends and family.
Beautiful. Okay, and final one of the Successful Seven. Where would you want to be 1 year from now?
1 year from now, I hope to be self-employed at a
Wow.
minimum. Yeah, I
Yeah.
want to start my own venture, whatever it may be, and be my own sort of boss, my own sort of manager, right? Not work for a company anymore.
Yeah. That's very cool. Okay, we'll check in. Anything else you'd like to share?
That's Nick, and I'm blasting off.
Thank you so much for coming on to the podcast episode.
Of course. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Three, two, one. Launch to success with Vera V. Thank you so much to Nick for joining the podcast episode. I thought it was so valuable, absolutely packed with value. I wish I heard this when I was first in high school, but I'm really glad that I got to hear it right now. Comment your favorite and most important insight in the comments below, because as I always say, reflection is the most important part of the learning process. And if you're ready to take your social media to the next level, social media growth, social media revenue, then be sure to click the link in the description and we'll get started working together right away, because social media is one of the coolest things and it is the way to achieve your dream life and boost your business and boost your success. Otherwise, have a beautiful rest of your day. And remember, the new podcast episodes come out every Wednesday at 6 a.m. Pacific Standard Time.